Divya, over to you. We've got the best of OT professionals. More than 100 have registered from GCC, oil and gas, manufacturing companies. This is going to be a great fun session. Over to you, Divya. Divya, you're on mute.
Yeah, so thank you very much, and a very good afternoon to all of you. First of all, we would like to thank all of you who have joined. I know it's a Thursday afternoon. Some of you are heading into a weekend, but you made time to attend this webinar, and that means a lot to us. Before I begin, let me introduce myself. I am Divya Raj, and I lead the practice of OT and XIoT security in Paramount and Ahlan. And I am joined by two young entrepreneurs, Dr. Vishram Mishra from Microsec and Mr. Late Shaheen from Secolf, both of whom are very passionate about securing critical infrastructure. And they understood some of the key challenges, and that is why they conceptualized and developed their platform to address these challenges. And today's webinar, to be honest, is not about a product pitch or going on about what their technology is, but it is more holistic, addressing what challenges we face today as OT professionals or guardians of the OT world, and what are those essential controls that we need to have in place to secure our environment and build a resilient organization, right? So I very briefly introduced, amongst the three of us, that is me, Laith, and Vishram, we come with over 55 years of experience in critical infrastructure. And we will get into candid conversations around securing during the course of the webinar, and we'll bring our experience onto the table. Now, this webinar is hosted by Paramount and Ahlan with two of their very important partners, Microsec and Secolf. I would leave it to them to showcase what their product does through various demos and case studies. But for now, all I can say is Microsec is an asset management or asset visibility and vulnerability management tools and has many other features. And Secolf is an OT security training and awareness platform. So welcome, Vishram, and welcome, Laith. This is how we have structured the flow of our webinar. So we'll be very briefly touching upon the current trends and major cyber threats, why risk awareness is very important in OT, how do we build resilience in OT with Microsec, how do we bridge the gap between people, process, and technology so that everyone is aligned with the same goal in mind, and then human element, which is extremely important, on how we train our people to be the guardians of the environment that they are safeguarding. And we'll follow it up with question and answer. Right. Now, I want you to take a moment and look at these numbers, right? These are the numbers that have been pulled up for the last year from the Middle East region. And if you look at these numbers, you clearly know that manufacturing is a target for cybercrime. There have been over 3,000 attacks in the Middle East region, which means our region is vulnerable. And look at the average cost of breach, almost double the global average, which means that the stakes are extremely high. And what is a major contributor here? 80% of it, human element is involved, which tells us that humans are actually the weakest link. And we got to do what we got to do to strengthen that element, because any technology is as good as the people managing it, right? So this is just to tell you the state of affairs in our Middle East region vis-a-vis OT security. Now here, what we have done, I will not dive into each of these because I'm just setting the context for the webinar to carry forward, but the threats are many, okay? And if you look at the recent cyber attacks, we've had Stuxnet, where we had an APT. We have Saudi Aramco, Triton, where safety instrument systems were targeted. We have Dubai Metro, where operations were halted because of vulnerabilities in the modern systems. Okay, so the problem is not just legacy or modern. It's both, right? And that is where microsec will touch upon how we can go about securing environments that is a combination of both these kind of systems, because IT/OT convergence, let's agree or not, is happening as we move with Industry 4.0, right? So this is just to tell you that your environment is privy to any of these threats. And if there are some smart hackers sitting out there, they can exploit any of these and get into your environment and create ripples that could be very, very damaging. Now, our webinar also has audience engagement via polling questions. So this is one of the polling questions for you to ponder and answer so that we understand you better. So can we please have the poll up for our viewers to...
Yeah,
So the question is...
wanted to add something. Please answer these poll questions. We will tweak the presentation a little and stress on points that are dependent on the answers that we receive. So some points we might elaborate a little more and some a little less.
Absolutely. And the question is, what is the biggest challenge your organization is facing today in achieving OT security? Is it lack of awareness, lack of visibility, legacy systems, distributed ownership, unclear roles, lack of budgets? I think we would love to hear and be as candid as you can be, because that is when the conversation gets fruitful and we are able to address the key concern areas that you have.
Great.
So just let me know, Mukund, when I need to move forward from the polling question.
That's okay. I think we will just give people 1 more minute. There's a
Okay.
question. Do you have any examples of hacks that have happened on the petrochemical industry? This question is from Mr. Razdi.
I think I can address that if they get okay with it,
Yeah.
right? You may have heard about the Colonial Pipeline, right? The attack that happened there. Then also the Halliburton oil field service firm as well, right? So of course, the attacks are not just happening from the point of view of looking into like Stuxnet kind of thing, but mostly now coming from the ransomware point of view, meaning that there's now a monetary an angle for these attackers to basically take the money out of the entire system there. So yes, there are examples where we see such kind of attacks happening.
Even with
Fantastic.
Saudi Aramco, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So this is a question because Light and Vishram, you've handled projects across the world. So 50% of the people say that lack of OT security awareness is the biggest challenge. Is that a trend that you see across the world?
I believe Leith will be able to address that because that's his forte.
Leith, you want to address that?
Absolutely, I agree with the 50%, and that's definitely a global challenge that we see, which I'm going to touch on down the track, because there are reasons why the lack of OT security awareness is an issue or is a challenge for organizations. And yes, absolutely, I can share with you that companies here in Australia, in Europe, in the Middle East, in the US, all face similar challenge when it comes to OT security awareness, which I'm excited to actually be sharing with you and talking about.
Thanks, Leith. Thanks for the insight. In fact, if I have to give you my perspective, I mean, yes, I think, like I said, any technology, any intervention is as good as the people managing it. So I think fundamental is for people who are taking care of OT security systems, or OT systems rather, to be absolutely cyber aware. And in critical infrastructure, the way I see it, physical safety culture is so strong that we should be leveraging that to build a cyber safe culture. After all, security promotes safety, right? The end goal is safe operations, safe people, safe environment. So why do we shy away from building that culture and just focus on that physical safety, promotion of physical safety culture in the organization. That mindset shift has to happen, in my opinion. Okay, so if the polling is done, let's move forward. All right, before I hand it over to Vishram to take us through how to build a resilient OT environment, I just wanted to touch upon this particular slide of why risk awareness is crucial for industrial environments. I already mentioned about that entire safety culture, right? But for us to be able to do a risk-based approach to security, we have to first understand what our critical assets are, what kind of risks they are exposed to, and what kind of impact that they can have. Not every OT system sitting in your environment is taking care of a very critical process. So that prioritization, because resources, people, money, everything is limited. So how do you prioritize and how do you allocate and how do you minimize impact? Knowing that is very, very important. And knowing the complexity of the environment that we are in, which has real-time deterministic operations, which means responses have to be in real time in a very, very tight window. You have multiple systems, multiple vendors, complex protocols that you're managing in your environment. You have safety critical operations, right? And then with the whole physical cyber convergence piece that is happening, which means anything to your physical device can have computational outcomes, and vice versa. Any computational changes made can have physical impact on the devices in the field. And then the human element. All of this makes that environment complex, makes looking at risk extremely important from criticality and impact point of view, and then assigning resources makes more sense. So this awareness is the first step, in my opinion, for any owner of an OT environment to safeguard their environment. And with that, we move on to, so I covered a very broad scope of how you need to look at OT security from risk standpoint. But if you look at the various controls that are must have in an OT environment, we have kind of zeroed down into two very, very important controls. One is having an insight into your OT network, and second is the human element. So to take us through the first segment of knowing what's in your OT environment and then protecting it, I will now request Dr. Vishram Mishra to take over and take us through the webinar. Meanwhile, request you to please pop in your questions as and when you get it. We'll collate and answer them towards the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Divya. I'm going to share my screen now. Great. Great. Awesome. First of all, thanks, Divya, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you, Paramount team, for actually hosting this. And thank you for all the ladies and gents who have basically spared their valuable time to basically attend this webinar. And thank you to my co-host, Laith, who will be sharing more on training and awareness programs there. I'm Dr. Vishra. I'm the founder and CEO of Microsec. We focus on looking into resilience in OT, especially from cybersecurity point of view. Now, resilience is a very big topic, so I will just take it maybe like one or two elements of it and basically deep dive into it. Now, what does, cyber resilience really mean, right? If you were to ask me, right, I will simply say it's basically an organization's capability in terms of delivering the internet, let's say, or normal outcome, even if it's going through some kind of attack, even if this is going through some kind of, let's say, issues and whatever kind of, let's say, ransomware attacks and so on, right? But when you look into the cyber resilience itself, right, different organizations, different people have their own, ideologies around it. So if you ask Wiki, this is a standard definition where they talk about the continuously deliver the internet outcome, right, despite cyber attacks. But the moment you ask ChatGPT here, right, it's going to basically put it from the point of view of looking into continuing with minimal disruption. So ChatGPT is trying to be more from the point of a risk where the idea is to be still continue, but can we reduce the impact in certain ways, right? Now, of course, when you look into the whole aspect of resilience, especially in cyber, right, we have actually gone through at least 30 years of a journey, more than that, actually. So when we started the whole resilience or cyber resilience, right, it wasn't really focusing on cyber part. It was just focusing on the system part, right? We're focusing on reliability and safety, and of course, we were trying to achieve that with redundancy, right? Back like 34 or 35 years ago, right? And of course, once we saw the first cyber attack, especially on the industrial systems via Stuxnet, right, we realized this is actually possible. This could actually happen to any of the industrial organization, not just IT systems. And that's where we started focusing on saying, okay, fine, we need to have a resilience program that focuses on cybersecurity. And this is where the idea was to start having air gapping your systems, making sure that your system's up to date, patched. And of course, that's where the concept and the entire birth of 62443 framework really started. But it didn't just stop there, right? When we look into malwares like Stuxnet, right, these are very targeted, typically requires a lot of resources, especially at the state level or national level to basically achieve that, right? What really happened after that? Individual hackers and organizations, and I would say groups, right? They started realizing that there's a big money here. So they started actually building ransomware on top of existing Sub7 and other modules. So that's what we saw back in 2015, where we start seeing NotPetya as well as Indestroyer, where they were actually causing ransomware attacks. And of course, when you are hit by ransomware, your entire system is basically fully encrypted. You cannot basically take control of your systems. And this is where then the whole aspect of backup recoveries, BCP and everything basically got started, right? But even after that, we move forward, right? Looking into the current context, now we are talking about IoT. I mean, of course, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we were talking about IoT, right? And that's where the entire convergence will really happen, right? We're focusing on IT-OT convergence, how this is going to actually impact, and the associated responsibilities, liabilities as well, right? And of course, this is where we look into the core technologies, because if we want to achieve that, right, we want to make sure that we should be able to look into each and every asset that connects to it. We need to have real-time monitoring, real-time visibility. We need to have segmentation between, let's say, OT and IT and different zoning and subnets there. And of course, looking into the attack surface management there, like threat intels and so on. But the resiliency just doesn't just stop there, right? When we look into the advanced level threats, especially with LLMs, right, as well as looking into the post-quantum computers that are going to bring or basically crack all of your classical cryptography, right? We had to basically move one step forward. When you have state-level threats, insider attacks, and so on, you have to basically focus towards automation point of view. When you're looking into the state-level threats, you have to look into zero-day vulnerabilities, because there are hackers who are selling your data, your not just data, your zero-day vulnerabilities on dark web. So because of that, we need to basically come with a new form of resiliency, and this is what we call it true resiliency, or there are different terminologies. People call it holistic resiliency, 360 resiliency, and so on. Now, we can discuss all of this, but this is a very big topic, so we'll just take two parts of it. We'll look into the asset management, especially the challenge that typically comes out of it, and we'll focus on automated assessments here. So if you've seen, if you use any of the asset management tool, asset management tool, right? The reason you use it because you can't protect what you can't see, right? And that's where you see, okay, fine, I need to have some kind of a tool that actually helps me to visualize each and every element in my network, in my system, right? And that's where you basically have this kind of body model. You have all the level zeros to level 4 or 5. You put your sensors, you put your monitoring systems, and you start basically collecting all the data, right? And once you start receiving the data from L1, L2, L3, you're able to basically enumerate all the devices from those layers. But there is a challenge here. There is an issue here. There's an issue here. The issue here is that although you're receiving the data traffic from L1, L2, L3 layers, right, you're only able to enumerate traffic or devices from those layers, meaning that you are missing the data as well as the enumeration of devices from L0 layer, because that layer does not communicate over IP protocol. So typically, because they are hidden behind it, let's say PLC, in this case, via 2.3 or 203 wire interface, like a proper RS-232 kind of interfaces there, or simple 2-wire interface. The challenge here is that they do not advertise directly on IP layer, which is where your sensors and monitoring systems connected to. And because you're not able to visualize it, you cannot have true resiliency in this case. And of course, your typical solution will simply just show an asset management kind of thing like this, where you're able to see each and every IP layer and IP protocol devices there. So the question is, how do we solve this kind of challenge here, right? To solve this kind of challenge, what you can do is that you can build an discovery stack. We call it L0 discovery stack here, right? And of course, L0 discovery means that you're able to identify L0 devices via looking into the data frames that you receive from L1 and L2 layer. And the question is how, right? So an L0 discovery stack will have 4 different layers. The first layer is DPI, deep packet inspection. So in this layer, we identify each and every headers as well as application that is basically routed through the L1 to the sensors. So in this particular layer, we are able to decode each and every aspect of the PLC that's connected and what kind of control is receiving or is sending. Beyond DPI, we have to look into heuristics. So each and every devices or segment devices, right, they behave in a certain way. So for instance, if you look into temperature data, humidity data, any kind of, let's say, actuation control data and so on, right, they typically follow a certain register commands. Based on the heuristic itself, you'll be able to decode what kind of PLC, what kind of sensor or actuator is connected behind the PLC there. And of course, then moving towards, we can use machine learning-based behavior to identify the kind of sensor. Of course, you won't be able to type the exact vendor of sensors or the brand of the sensor, the company sensor, but you can tell what kind of sensor that is, right? Is it sending the temperature data? Is it sending the humidity data? Or is it like a control kind of thing? Is it like actuation? Is it like some kind of relay control systems, right? So you're able to identify that. Of course, not the exact brand vendor, but you should be able to identify that. And then of course, sorry, Mukund, do you want to add something?
There was a question, so I was wondering if you will have the time to answer it or you want to pick it up
Yes, let me just look into it.
Yeah, the question is very simple.
Yeah.
Again, I think this is from Mr. Rajdeep. He's asking, a lot of our equipment suppliers have promised that our new petrochemical plant equipments will be cybersecurity compliant.
Yeah.
How much should I rely on assurances such as these?
Okay, so this is actually a very good question, right? And a lot of people, a lot of users expect that the vendor has to provide that compliance. And to be honest, at certain level, I mean, they have to. But you see, cybersecurity compliances doesn't just go from vendor point of view, right? It also goes from a user point of view, right? So for instance, within 62443 control framework, right, you have a lot of other compliance requirement that says about, let's say, BCP plan, whether you have backup recovery, whether you have some kind of, let's say, root of trust manager on your end and so on. So you cannot just rely everything on the vendor point of view. You need to have your own control measures on your end. But not just that, right? A lot of places, what is happening right now, especially because of, I mean, all the national level issues, I won't blame anybody, I won't name here, just for my own say here on this webinar. But as you know, the state of the world right now, especially when countries are not able to trust each other, right? The question typically arises that, are you going to trust the OEM that is from another country? So you see, each and every government of a country is going to actually, I mean, if not sooner, but later, they will actually mandate that the security controls needs to be actually handled by the end user. I hope that actually addresses your question there. Okay, I'll come back to this here.
Yeah, if I can just jump in here,
Yes,
Vishram.
yeah,
In
go
fact,
ahead.
one of our customers, when they reached out to us for doing an assessment against IC 62443, their entire assessment was based on us checking whether their components that are getting into the final fabricated grid are compliant to IC 62443 3-3, I think, yeah. Just correct me if I'm wrong, yeah. I don't remember the domain number, but there is a particular domain within IC 62443 that talks about product compliance.
So product compliance typically goes towards 4-2, 4-1. 4-1 is SDLC, 4-2 is the controls and so on. So you're right that as part of whether the particular, let's say, devices that are getting deployed inside an organization, right, from 62443 point of view, whether they're compliant or not. And sometimes you get a third-party certification from companies or agencies like TOSO, Duel, and so on, that it actually issues certificates like that. But that being said, right, especially from a integration point of view, end user deployment point of view, right, especially at the site level, right, the challenge here is that it's not just one vendor, it's not just one user, right? There's a whole integration, there's a whole combination, there's a whole heterogeneity that typically goes around. So that's why the security control at the end of the day, right, typically basically falls, or at least the assessment part typically falls onto the end user side. And this is one of the things we are trying to achieve right now on our end. Later on, I will share like how does an end user can actually do the assessment on their end without actually putting a lot of effort, without actually going through the entire OEMs to actually achieve that. Great. Now coming back to yeah, Bukit, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
And go ahead.
Two very quick questions. How do you handle vendor-specific protocols to identify devices and assess them?
Yeah.
Two, would AI help cyber resilience considering OT system is air-gapped? Excellent question according to me, but anyway.
Okay, so the first question looking into the proprietary protocols and so on, right? Okay, let me just come to this part here. So you see the 4 stacks here right now. This is the answer to the first question. How do we handle a protocol that is very product specific, that is not open, that's not standardized, is only meant for the product there? So if you look at the 4 stacks here, right? DPI stack is very product specific, meaning that we go to the data sheet of the product, we understand how it works, and so on and so on. But let's say if we don't have that, we look into the heuristic part, because even the protocol is proprietary, it has headers. And based on the header itself, we can identify certain heuristics there. Now, I'm not going to say that this is going to be 100% accurate, but there are chances are that based on what we have seen, around 50 to 60% of the results received based on the data itself is actually accurate. The other part is that now going to the other layers like machine learning layers and so on, right? So in this case, what happens is that if they are, let's say, vendors who are using proprietary protocols and so on, you can use machine learning as a black box. And this is a beautiful thing about machine learning. You can use it as a black box to actually train certain models against certain, let's say, target devices. Now, the machine learning model will not know exactly what is inside the entire payload there. It will not even look into the entire content, but it knows that, oh, this is how it's supposed to look like, this is how it's supposed to match, and so on and so on. So machine learning really good, works very well, especially such kind of scenarios. But the challenge here is that in this case, you have to do supervised training, meaning that we should have actually those kind of vendors and products in our hand to make sure that we can train them against those devices. Once trained, then you can deploy across all the sites. Now, I hope this actually makes sense. Now, the fourth part, which is the device data signatures, right? Now, this is actually very important. So even though the protocol is proprietary and so on, right? What typically happens is that when you actually get the payload from the protocol itself, let's say if you're using a simple MSTP-based 232 with, let's say, master slave bit and so on, you get a whole frame there, right? Of course, in the frame itself, you have master controls, then you have payload, then you have your checksum, CRC, and all the other things there. So what typically happens here is that you're able to basically put the certain kind of, let's say, metadata and certain kind of, let's say, the signature data against certain devices. So let's say if you identified that, oh, these 10 devices have this signature, these 20 devices have this signature. In that case, you are able to identify. Now, whether you're able to understand signature, it does not really need to. Because in the case of DPI, you need to basically understand what the signature really means, what the protocol really means, and so on. But from a device data signature point of view, you don't really care about it because you're just trying to identify the device. That's it. You're not trying to say what the device is trying to communicate to, what the device is trying to say, and things like that. So there are ways through which you'll be able to achieve such kind of discovery of devices where the protocols are proprietary. Again, each of the methods here has their own pros and cons, and that's why we recommend using the entire stack. Now the second question, right? Sorry, Mukund, what was the second question?
Yeah, how would AI help in cyber resilience?
Oh, yes. Okay. Then this
the OT system is air-gapped.
Yeah.
Doctor, you need to be really quick because
yes. Sorry, there's a lot of questions coming in, right? So just to quickly address that, AI can definitely help in multiple ways. And the way we also use AI in our case here is that basically we look into the device signatures based on the learned behavior, categorization, and so on. And these are actually done on-prem. AI doesn't need to be as heavy it used to be, depending upon what you're trying to achieve. If you're using support vector machine, if you're using ANN or in deep learning and so on, right, you can do it on-prem. While just using a simple 4-core, 8-core kind of processor. If you really want to go ahead with LLMs, you can use a simple GPUs. You can use class A NVIDIA kind of GPUs as well. So If you're looking into LLM models, now you have LLM models that fits into 200 GB, 300 GB kind of, let's say, data. So you can do things on-prem as well. And of course, there are endless application around AI for cybersecurity. You are able to basically ask LLM to basically in terms of the issues. Like for instance, you have a lot of alerts coming in. You can ask LLM, oh, what does this alert really mean? Should I be really worried about this? And so on. There are a lot of things that are happening around it. We can definitely discuss that. Okay, great. Mukund, shall I move on?
Please move on.
Great.
We're running
Okay.
short of time.
Awesome. So once you have this L0 discovery stack here, right, what you can do is that you can see your devices basically popping up. You can basically see how things are basically connected, and you're able to basically have the full view of your network architecture there. Now, before we move to the automated assessment, right, I would like to quickly just spend maybe 1 minute on in terms of the governance and standards. So when we look into standard itself, right, and standard could be an international standard that basically get followed across the world. But when you look into the compliance itself, compliance is mostly national or country level driven, right? So in this case, we're talking about OTCC and IEC 62443 here. And when we talk about the control levels, security zones, security levels, and so on, right? OTCC itself, utilizes a lot of parts from IEC 62443. But what it has done is that it has simplified a lot of part to make sure that it does not become as complex as 62443. So of course, it has reduced some kind of, let's say, security levels. So it's not explicitly defined. It has reduced certain parts to make sure that you're able to still implement it. But the challenge typically lies is, what if you are a multinational, corporation that has a HQ in Switzerland or US or somewhere else, and you have factories in Middle East, or if you have HQ in Middle East and you have factories somewhere else, right? So in this case, then you have to comply with different standards, right? So you're following the OTC framework and 62443, which has different kind of, control applications, right? So typically the way it is done right now is that, so OTCC has provided this kind of tool. So this tool is a Excel sheet-based tool where you're able to manually input the information, and this tool then actually helps you tell how much you comply with OTCC. So it's really good. If you haven't used this tool, you can go online, you can basically download this tool, and it's really useful. But there are a lot of challenges with this tool. This tool is manual. And in terms of all the assets, right, you have to put all the asset information here by yourself. And the other challenge is that this is driven by human, and humans are typically biased. I'm not going to share my weakness, my issues within this tool. Otherwise, the organization is going to know, right? And of course, you're not able to basically see where do you stand. I have a score 30 out of 47. Is it good? Is it bad? Am I performing better than others? Am I worse than others? And of course, if you're multiple sites, right, you'll not be able to get a generic on average kind of view there, right? And of course, there are a lot of other missing functionality in terms of control evaluation and other kind of functionalities there. Now, the moment we talk about manual assessment itself, right, there are a lot of challenges with that as well. It takes a lot of time. I'm pretty sure that a lot of users here, right, will have gone through manual assessment. It takes 4 to 8 weeks, right? And even though when you go through that kind of rigorous process, right, your accuracy typically is below 43% based on all the standards and all the work we have done is below 43%. It happens because typically either you're missing certain data, you're missing certain data sheet, you're missing either an architecture, or there's a handover that happened, and during the handover, a lot of things have been shifted. You have some kind of rogue device that you haven't really taken into calculation. So there's a lot of issue that happens because of which your accuracy is typically less than 43%. And of course, you have issues, especially in terms of discovering misconfiguration, because when you don't connect to the real network, right, you don't know how the devices are configured. Now, coming back to what Divya initially mentioned, right, if a device is compliant with 4-2, it does not mean that it's performing against or equivalent to OTCC requirement. You see, just because a particular laptop has TPM chip doesn't mean that it's using TPM chip. So there's a very big difference in terms of achieving or having the functionality and using the functionality. So the manual assessment misses the point of configuration, whether it's really using that particular functionality, is using the cryptography, is using the right certificates, and so on. And of course, typically manual assessment means that you have to, every 6 months, 12 months, depending upon the requirement, you have to manually assess it. So this is where we are trying to shift the whole paradigm. We're trying to make assessment as simple as possible, right? To make sure that, just like one of the users actually rightly asked a question, right? How do we, vendors saying that they're going to provide it, right? But how do we automatically evaluate, right? So this is where we have built an assessment stack, right? And now again, what we are going to mention here is not like a Bible. It's not going to be a fixed kind of, let's say, stack here. there are other researchers who are contributing the stack to basically add more and more capability here. So let's take an example here on the left-hand side. You got L2, L3, L4 layer. You got all the networks here. You have a field engineer who basically go to the site, gets the data from the site, and basically passes it to your cloud or your assessment stack. So your assessment stack will have 6 components here. So it will have asset discovery, network topology, zoning, risk profiling, vulnerability assessment, and security level target answers. Once you have these 6 stacks, right, you will be able to first figure out, based on the security control of 62443 OTCC, right, how much it is compliant. So first of all, you need to make sure that there are 6 stacks like this. Of course, you have to perform your own heuristics. You need to answer, you need to make sure that the heuristic is able to address the questions based on the questions, the detailed questions, or the security control questions that are asked in the OTCC, right? Because security OTCC has 3 different levels, right? Level 1, level 2, level 3. Level 3 has around 130 plus questions. So the heuristics needs to be based on the information that you derive from these stack, you put into the heuristics, and then heuristic will basically address those 130 plus questions. So this is how it looks like. You have your own zoning conduit based on, let's say, 62443 3-2. You're able to basically see all of that. Then you are able to basically do function requirement questions here, like DOS protection and so on. You are able to automatically populate all of this based on the information you receive from the network. And then, of course, you are able to do the SLA, SLT to basically look into where you are, and of course, what kind of assurance you want to provide there. And once you have done that, you're able to see such kind of substation assessment. And if you would like to have a report, you also get a report like that. And of course, you can customize the report for different stakeholders, right? You have management, you have engineers, you would like your device side, and of course, you can do different kind of report generation based on that. Let me actually just go through a very quick case study. I'll just take maybe another 1-2 minutes on this one. So this is a bottling plant in Malaysia. So what this bottling plant has right now, and this is actually one of the weirdest plants we saw. It has around 22 PLCs that are behind one main PLC. And this one main PLC then connects to a SCADA system. That SCADA system then controls this main PLC. And then there's a HMI also attached. Why it is attached, I have no clue, but they did that. What they were doing was that they were putting a monitoring system next to the switch, and the idea was that they would like to actually visualize all the PLCs that are behind the main PLC. So the main PLC, the master PLC, and the other PLCs are slave PLCs. And through the core switch, they actually wanted to see all of the slave PLCs. And that was actually quite a big challenge. Not just that, they wanted to see the devices that are attached behind the slave PLCs as well, which is typically in this case level 0. If you would like to basically re-architect, the main PLC will become L2. Your sub PLC will become L1, and your device will become L0. But they put it in flat between main PLC and the sub PLC in an L1 layer here. So the first challenge was that, how do we identify the other PLCs and devices that are behind the main PLC? And second was basically to do with 62443-2 assessment. So in this case, we use the stack from the L1 discovery to make sure that L1, L0 discovery to make sure that we can discover the slave PLC, L0 to discover the devices. We only discovered the devices with 65% accuracy. Now, I understand that some of you guys will think that 65% accuracy is very bad. But imagine, right, you have devices that are behind a slave PLC that is behind a main PLC where you're basically collecting your data. So with that, getting a 65% accuracy is actually quite good, because without using such kind of stack, you cannot even get any kind of data from those devices there. And of course, once we did the automated assessment, right, we were able to achieve around 70 to 71% kind of automated filling. There was still 30% of manual filling that was required in the question. So 30% means that some questions will be like, do you have BCP plan in place? How do you do typical, how frequently do you typically do the backups and so on and so on? So those kind of questions typically come in, and of course you have to address those manually, right? And the last thing we basically done with them was that we actually helped them to achieve a SL2 level, to make sure that they are able to comply with that. So I'll basically conclude this, just focusing on a few key takeaways here. When you look into the true resiliency in this case, right, automation is the key. And there are multiple reasons behind it. First of all, automation has the best turnaround time. Especially if you'd like to get any kind of, let's say, alerts, any kind of, let's say, orchestration, any kind of, let's say, feedback, or any kind of, let's say, access control, right? Automation is the best way to really do that, because it has the fastest turnaround time. At the same time, right, automation also gives you the highest accuracy. if you're going with assessments, if you're going with, discovery or devices and so on, right, it has the highest, accuracy. The second point basically will be focusing on how do you actually, assign any kind of criticality and so on, right? So typically you need to prioritize based on the risk that you're going to identify for each of the assets and what kind of impact it's going to bring in, right? So just like what we do with 62443 zone and conduit, right? So you need to identify zones where you're going to basically assign highest risk. And the third thing here that you see right now is one of the biggest issue we have seen among all the operators. They're using SOC platform, SIEM platform. They basically bombarded with so many of alerts. And of course, alert fatigue is actually quite a major thing. A lot of our CISO friends and their friends, right, especially analysts, right, they go through alert fatigue. So in this case, you have to make sure that whatever kind of alert you're receiving right now is attached to certain devices or network that has high risk. And based on that, you're able to basically prioritize your alerts. And one of the aspect, especially when we discuss resiliency, was defense in depth, zero trust, and all of the things there, right? And these are all the topics you will find across, discussions there. You have to make sure that you're able to take a combination of the insight, not just look into the silo result from any of the solution, but you need to take a combination of the insight from all of these solutions. So if you have access control, if you have firewall, if you have IDS, if you have monitoring, if you have, let's say, asset discovery and so on, you need to combine all of that to basically generate the right insight. And of course, last but not the least, right, from a proper resiliency point of view, right, you need to implement proper segmentations. Either you do with subnet or you do with VLAN or something like a virtual VLAN, or even let's say virtual to virtual VLAN as well, right? You have to implement something around that to make sure that you are able to segment it. And of course, have a proper patch management policies, have proper access control methods, and you are able to do assessments in an easy way, right? And the important part is a training awareness, which my dear friend Laith will take over. Shall I stop here or move to the following question here, guys?
Let's take about 30 seconds to answer this poll, and let's move on. Light has some interesting insights as well to share.
So the question here, guys, is as a stakeholder, which out of the following controls is your top priority, right? So based on your day-to-day kind of work, right, do you see asset visibility as a major challenge? Do you see risk-based vulnerability management as a big challenge? Do you have any IDR issue that you're facing right now? Do you think that building a defensible architecture is a big issue? Or do you think that secure remote access is going to be a big issue for you?
Great. So while the questions, while we are waiting for the poll results, please take it over, Light. Thanks.
Yeah.
Over to you, Shambhavi. Divya?
Yeah, I'll take over.
But great presentation, Vishram, and I think you touched on really key controls and key challenges I feel that organizations regularly see. So for context, guys, excited to meet you all and be here. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to jump through key elements of the presentation, and we can, of course, if anyone needs any further information or to discuss anything further, that's the favorite topic to me, so we can certainly do so. What basically we're going to talk about is why is OT security awareness essential? It's important to start with by thinking that, or keeping in mind that there are multiple and different ways of OT security awareness training. There's face-to-face training, there's workshop-based training, there is virtual labs training, hands-on labs training, escape the rooms, and so on. But what we see more and more in organizations is the need for scalable OT security awareness training. And that is due to the reason of who is the audience that organizations are looking to train. In many cases, the audience the organizations are looking to train are basically the operators, the engineers, the staff that control OT, rather than the cyber team and the IT personnel, which of course are still important and still get a lot of the training. But what organizations are requiring more and more is scalable training. And one of the key challenges that they have identified, and when I say they have identified, Secure provides this OT awareness globally. So we literally speak to companies all the way from Australia to the other end of the world, in Africa, in Europe, in the Middle East, and so on. And the challenges are common. The challenges are mainly due to the fact that the human error is and will continue to be a key driver, unintentionally, whether intentionally or unintentionally, but it's a key element. And I'm going to talk about an incident that happened here in Australia back in the year 2000, which is believed to be the first OT attack. And then progressing to the challenge of most of the training the organizations have is IT security centric. And therefore, it's now about time to complement it with OT security awareness. So the key 6 factors or reasons I'm going to touch on are the human risk management element, the fact that the threat landscape is really evolving, it's expanding, it's growing. There are multiple compliance requirements based on jurisdictions. So Vish touched on Vish as in Vishram. He touched on the OTCC. In Dubai, there is DISC. In Europe, there is NIS2. In Australia, there is the Australian Energy Sector Cybersecurity Framework. They're all standards that have a component of requirement basically to do security awareness training. And it's a fact that a lot of companies do security awareness training for compliance requirements. And then, of course, you have other reasons such as the insider threats, incident response, and the culture of security. So I'm going to go in and touch on each of these points basically. And to start with, I think it would be good to hear everyone's thoughts into what do you feel, based on your experience, is the biggest challenge in running a successful OT security awareness training program, assuming you've been through that or you've tried doing that? And in the interest of time, if we can just push the poll through, but I will basically keep going just as that and these are considering the question. But some of the key challenges we see is engaging OT staff who generally are very busy and cybersecurity is not a priority for them. The fact that having tailored content specific to OT, contextualized to an organization, tends to be a challenge, and the element of the limited time and resources to roll out training effectively.
Just give me a second. Just give me a second. Prem, can you just pull up the poll, please? Go ahead, Live. Go ahead.
Cool. Makes the poll more interesting, guys, while you're listening, answering too. But basically, the first element or the first factor, and in no way, shape, or form are these factors that I'm touching on sequential, but they're generally the biggest factors. And human error, or now it's getting or becoming more known as the human risk management, is basically in OT, like in other environments, and even in IT and the wider business. But in OT specifically, you have employees, you have subcontractors, you have third and fourth party providers, you have vendors working in the environment which should be aware or must be aware of things like phishing emails, social engineering, and other techniques that could be used to get in. Because all it requires is basically one targeted mistake, and that is enough to get people in. So by providing OT awareness training, it basically helps those people that have the keys to the organization, to the heart of the organization, to the crown jewel, to understand what is it that they could pose as a risk. So some of the things that could be shared with them in training should be as simple as things that you should or you shouldn't do. And talking about, for example, the things that you should do, talking about recognizing phishing emails, recognizing telegating, challenging people that you see in a secured area that are unfamiliar to you. In many cases, in OT, you require a physical card to access a critical environment, ensuring basically that you don't share that physical card. So simple steps or simple tips as such that users can continually keep in their mind, including those that you might educate them on about not doing, such as plugging foreign devices, locking a workstation when you leave your computer. In many cases as well, there might be compensating controls where you don't really have to lock the workstation, but these might be controls specific to the business. And therefore, just touching on simple do's and don'ts in short, punchy videos is a way to pass as much awareness through various messages to different stakeholders. Another factor is the evolving threat landscape. And I believe we're all reading vendor reports every single day, and some are, outstanding, of course, but there are more and more attack vectors, more and more ransomware groups, more and more threats happening every day. So the cyber threat landscape is continually changing, and industrial companies and critical infrastructure organizations generally, they're high value targets. They basically, their targets, whether it's for geopolitical motives, it's for financial motives, it's for disruption motives, and the frequency and complexity of attacks is on the rise. So you've got risks like remote access risk, technological advancements, increase in IoT devices and to what Vishram was talking about, IoT devices, OT devices, IIoT devices, they're basically causing a more involved threat landscape. So it's important to share with the users what the attack surface is like and how it continually changes in their industry. Another reason, and again, conscious of time, is the compliance requirements. So for those of you in Saudi Arabia, you basically are familiar with the NCA OTCC. And for those of you in Dubai, you might be familiar with this and other examples, as I've mentioned, including generally all standard and frameworks actually talk about training. And they now specifically outline training that is required to be performed, keeping in mind that training on different layers based on the user role differs. So you might provide control system engineers a completely different training to what you might provide your operators. You might provide your operators completely different training to what you provide your executives. So coming with role-based training with content that is relevant for the user group is an element to ensure that that program as such is successful, that the program is basically having traction inside the organization. And research, we're actually soon launching a research about OT security awareness training across multiple sectors, and it would be a very interesting paper that we will release towards the end of the year. But most conversations now, the reason companies do OT security awareness training is either due to compliance and the gap they have, or due to the fact that they've done a risk assessment and the risk assessment identified that there is a lack of training. The other element, which is really important and interesting too, is the insider threats. So I'm going to use here the incident that happened in Australia in the year 2000 to talk about the insider threat element. But insider threats are all around us. Insider threats have always been there. They can come from a current employee, former employee, contractor, individual that has access to specific systems. They could come from anywhere. And by providing training to the users about the risks such as insider threats, this means that those employees would keep an eye into suspicious behavior that people around them would do. I'm not sure how many of you have seen the, I think that probably I went, cool. Well, we've got another poll question, which I might actually skip through to get to where I need to get to. But in fact,
Yeah.
this is one that we could,
I think, yeah, this is, I think it's a good question. I think what has happened is Light and Vishram and Divya, we've all gotten our resources together and we are offering a free OT assessment test for your organization. Please fill in the poll and answer this, and then we will reach out to you.
Yeah,
Go
please.
ahead, Go ahead,
Yeah,
Light.
while you're doing that, please let's keep this on the screen for 30 seconds. But while you're doing that, I'm going to walk you through what happened in Maroochy, which is a part of a city basically in Queensland in Australia. So in the early 2000s, the Queensland Maroochy Council, as such, had an unexplained fault in their sewage treatment system for over 3 months. At the end of that period, it resulted in the overflow of 800,000 liters of raw sewage released to the city of Brisbane. After further investigation, they identified that the employee who did the attack or caused the attack was a subcontractor that was not given a job at the council. He stole equipment, he stole a remotely connected equipment, and he managed to basically interfere with the SCADA system. This example alone just shows that insider threats have always been there. And the fact that if it shows several elements, one of them is the lack of the cyber preparedness. So should there be monitoring in place? Should there be an asset inventory in place? Should there be proper security training? Then this could have been identified or at least mitigated. And that's an example of where insider threats basically come in. I think I'll take control again. Divya, cool. Or Divya, I've got it here. Perfect. So the other thing, and again, conscious of time, the one that I really wanted to touch on here is the element of the culture of security, as well as the element of how to build a successful OT cybersecurity awareness program. As I mentioned, there are several factors I want to speak about, which incident response readiness is one of, as well as the culture of security. So I'm going to skip from the incident response readiness element of it due to the time. But again, happy to have a discussion offline, or please reach out to us and we can discuss it. There are some very interesting things around incident response to train and raise awareness around, specifically when it comes to identifying unusual behavior in an OT environment and how to train the operators around it. But the key one that I feel organizations struggle with and organizations generally have a question around is, how do we build a culture of security? It's a question that I don't think anyone has an answer for, but there are many elements to help build a culture of cybersecurity. And one crucial one is having the responsibilities and accountabilities in the business identified, so that the drive for the training is very clear and the messaging is very clear. So it comes from the top. And once that messaging is there and the responsibility is clear to everyone, most of the users in an organization get on that journey. So to wrap it up, I'm basically going to share, based on experience we've seen, the 6 key components into building a successful OT cybersecurity awareness program. And the first one is identifying the target audiences. There are different groups in the business. There are operators, there are IT staff, there are cyber staff, there are engineers. So it's important to basically identify your target audience and group them down into different groups. The other element will become providing tailored training to those groups, to those roles and responsibilities, so that they see what they want to see on the level that they need to see. Provide training that is contextualized. So once you've done the groups, you've come up with what training is relevant, contextualize it. Talk about existing policies and procedures, existing controls, and so on. Have the buy-in from the business, as I mentioned, the accountability and responsibility. And of course, keep in mind that time is short, same as now, and therefore provide exact snippets to the right users in a manner that can scale and they can do it anywhere at any time. And that's basically what I wanted to cover today. And as I said, happy to dive deeper into any components offline. Over to you, Divya.
Yeah, Mr. Light, you got some Light, Divya, or Vishram, whoever wants to answer. There are some very interesting questions. Question number 1: should OT security team report to the company CISO or report to the manufacturing section head? Question from Mr. Mohammed.
I believe OT security team should report to the cyber team, but they should have an engineer that sits in between the engineering team and the cyber team as the bridge. Someone that comes ideally from an OT background, someone that understands the OT environment, has rapport with the engineers, comes to the cyber team and becomes that champion that sits in between, but they report to the CISO.
Fantastic. There are 3 more questions. Sorry, 2 more questions. One is, what training is mandatory for OTCC compliance as per NCA and KSA?
I'm unable to answer this right now and exactly point to it. However, happy to come back to you on that component.
Can someone unmute me?
Why
You
have
are.
you been muted? You are heard loud and clear, madam.
Okay, what was the question again? Sorry.
The question is, what training is mandatory for OTCC compliance as per NCA and KSA? Just get
What
back to
training?
the last. Yeah. What trainings are mandatory for OTCC compliance as per NCA and KSA? That's the question.
Okay. There is typically not trainings listed down that needs to be done. However, what NCA calls for is whether awareness programs are in place in terms of cybersecurity within the organization. And you have to submit documentation around it, but that doesn't mean that. So, I mean, typically to answer the question, there is not anything specified as to what kind of training program, but cyber awareness training is definitely required. Vishram, you want to add into it?
I'll just add something, sorry, briefly to
Yeah.
that, because similar to what Divya said, generally, whether it's OTCC, NCA, OTCC, or any other standard, they don't say what is it that you need to provide. They say
Yeah,
provide
correct.
role-based training, but a lot of
Yeah.
organizations opt into providing training different levels for the executives to understand what is OTCC and why they need to put budget and comply with it. For the cyber team, train them on what the controls are so that they learn how to actually deploy, implement the controls to meet the standard, and then generally a risk-based training for the wider user groups.
And because the roles each carry are also different, so the training, like Laith said, has to be contextualized as well. So there is no specific layout as to what training, but like Laith mentioned, that's how it should be addressed.
Okay. Right. Divya, can you, there are two more questions. We will just answer them as well. One question is, what OT risk is generally elevated to the committee/board level? That's one question. And Divya, just get your slides back. No, we are seeing just blank.
Okay. Sorry.
Just get your slide back, please. And there are two more questions. We'll answer them.
I'll just share my thoughts on this one whilst Divya is getting the slides back, and then Vishram, please share based on your experience. But what OT risk generally is elevated to committee or board level, I think this goes a step before that, and that is the risk register. What is the risk appetite of the organization? What's the risk register? And also, I assume when you say OT risk, we're talking cyber risk here. Is the cyber risk part of the organization's risk register? Getting the attention of the board about OT risk without them understanding what is OT, again, back to the awareness piece, is actually difficult. We've seen examples for organizations that have reported on cyber generally to the board, and these are public organizations, for many, many years, saying that we've achieved a specific maturity against a certain standard. And it's gone for years, where one day the board asked the CISO, and is that too across OT as well? And the CISO's response was, I'm not responsible for OT. That CISO was fired, in fact, after a month of that whole thing. And that is because no one really mentioned ever to the CISO in the KPIs and the contract you're in charge of OT cyber. OT cyber risks were never reported to the board. It was just cyber. Everyone assumed that's IT and OT. And therefore, it's a bit vague. So to identify which risks get reported, that responsibility and accountability is important, and a risk register understanding is also important.
Let me add.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'll
please.
add to that. In terms of which risks get reported from operational technology perspective, if you look at what matters most within an operational technology environment is safety and reliability. So any risk that directly contributes to a disruption to your operation, a disruption to safety of people, equipment, or environment around takes the highest precedence. And of course, followed by availability thereafter. So at a very broader level, those are the risks. And that could be based on, again, your approach of identifying which assets, what impacts, and further, segregating to different controls that have to be in place to protect those assets. So there is no firm answer to this, but it is a very contextualized answer to different sectors that operate. Yeah.
So I'll just take a stab at it. To be honest, when we think about risk itself, right? I mean, I think the question is which risks do we bring it in front of board and management and so on, right? I won't call it risk. I will call it threats and everything else that basically lies around. And of course, as Divya mentioned, right? And as Lid mentioned, especially with the risk registers, right? We need to make sure that there are risk registers that are basically recording all the risks that are basically attached to particular assets and basically bring it forward, right? I won't point on the risk, but I'll point on the threats actually. And the threats that are basically attached with high risk components that we already identified based on the risk assessment you have performed on systems then, right? So if you see a high threat based on the risk that is already assigned to a particular, let's say, safety system or critical system that you already identified there, you're going to assign the risk based on certain factors, right? For instance, whether this is going to be let's say, human life that could be in danger because of certain, let's say, a boiler that can be busted, or it could be basically a very huge monetary loss, right? That could be resulted into downtime for maybe like months and so on. Or it could be a national level threat that is most likely, like, let's say, power stations getting down and so on, right? So to be honest, that has to play with risk registers as well as your own company's policies. You cannot just say that this particular risk is going to be higher than this one. Of course, human life should be at priority, but depending upon which organization, which function you're performing, or when I say you as in like the company itself, the organization, the whatever kind of function they're performing, you will have different priorities. I mean, we keep on saying that life should be at the priority, but I mean, it's a sad state of affair. It's not always the highest priority depending upon the criticality of what the work you're doing right now. If you're in defense and military, then of course, in that case, the life is basically considered secondary. Your objective is considered, I mean, primary. So not getting there, but depending upon your own priority that has been set up by your own management board, you will basically classify it. But you need to have that you need to have that kind of classification there.
Okay, great. Last question is there, I mean, we're open to take more questions, but is there any minimum security baseline guidance for X-ray system? Some framework to refer to. I think there's a question from Mahendra ji. It's a very specific question. If you guys can take it, let's go for it, or else we will probably go back to him with some more details.
I would say basically that I would like to come back to you with some more details, because I know of a framework that's being built locally here for medical devices specifically in Australia by a respective health government department, and they're basing it on a health ISAC that is global as well. So we will come back to you on that one, whether someone has an answer or not, but I feel if that topic interests you, I think I've got something exciting for you to read.
Yeah. Mohammad Al Sheikh, do you feel NCA OTCC control is in full is enough to assure the company that will be attached by cyber? I think he meant attacked by cyber, because earlier we had IEC, now we have NCA OTCC. Divya, can you see the screen and answer the question, please?
Okay, Mukund, maybe I can take a stab.
Sorry.
Maybe I can take a stab at both the questions then, right? I think the previous question that was asked, especially on the healthcare side, right?
Yeah.
So typically, there are two different levels. One is looking into the healthcare, like hospital. The other is looking into the medical devices. Both are at different levels. So please, guys, don't mix it up. So medical devices we're looking into very specific from a device point of view in terms of the privacy and so on, so on. Healthcare looking into the overall organization. Healthcare, hospitals, and so on typically follow 62443. Any policy that is basically built will follow certain form of 62443 controls. Beyond that, then you have HIPAA, then you have CHA, then you have ADSC, and there are a few other frameworks that are there. So every country is coming with their own framework. So HIPAA is basically following US. Singapore has CSA-based CSA framework that is meant for that's launched by MOH, I think Ministry of Health. And I think similarly in Middle East we have a DHA as well, right? So each and every So each and every country has their own healthcare authorities that are basically raising the frameworks there. So I mean, it will be simply going back to you, right? Which country you're coming from, what kind of health authorities you have, what kind of frameworks they're following, and so on. You have to read on that. But typically from a organization point of view, right, or hospital point of view, is going to be 62443. Devices point of view, you can look into 4-2 controls. That is something that you see within HIPAA and any other kind of medical kind of security there.
And Mr. Mahendra, we can always have a separate session dedicated to, securing IoMT devices. That's a very niche area once again, and we will be happy to help and have a conversation with you around it. Yeah. For some reason, Mukund, I cannot see the question. So what was the question, the last question that you asked? On NCA, there was a question you were asking.
Do you feel implementing NCA OTCC control in full is enough to assure a company that it will not have cyber attacks? Because earlier we had IEC, now we have NCA OTCC. That's the question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So NCA OTCC was a part or a very small segment in NCA ECC, right? Now the whole regulation has been taken out independently and given importance, not just for OT environment, but also IoT in the form of CGIoT. And if you look at the NCA OTCC guidelines, more or less, most of the controls are mirroring the IEC 62443 framework altogether. So to answer the question, if you implement all the controls that are there in NCA OTCC, yes, you will be, 100% security, nobody can assure at any point in time because the threats are evolving, the landscape is changing, hackers are getting more intelligent, but at least that'll be one step towards your resilient organization. And those are by far the most important controls that you have to put in place. And even within NCA OTCC, there are 3 levels. So if you're going at the highest level and implementing all the controls, I think that's the best thing that you can do to secure your organization. Yes. Feel free to add Laith and Vishram if you want to. I mean,
Okay, I can just put my 2 cents there, right? Especially because the question is actually quite, right, especially from the point of view of the region itself, right? So yes, if you're able to implement the highest level of security from an OTCC point of view, level 3, then you'll be able to protect from all the well-known attacks. I will say, I'll be very mindful with the words well-known,
yes.
but not from zero-day attacks. You can never be secure from zero-day attacks because they are 0 days, right? So whether you look into 62443, whether you look into OTCC, right, the security controls are all almost same because they have been there for quite some time. So yes, for all well-known purposes, I would say yes, you'll be safe. You'll be able to protect your organizations from all the well-known attacks there. If you really would like to do or go beyond, then you have to look into ASMs, attack surface management. You have to basically do the zero-day vulnerabilities on your devices. You have to hire hackers to keep on testing. You have to go with advanced ASM who are doing dark web-based testings. So again, all of this will be something that you may have to invest in terms of basically going way and beyond. I hope that basically addresses the question there. Yeah.
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 Thanks, Vishram.
I think we've come to the end of the webinar. I mean, we are more than happy to stay back if you have any more questions. I think overall we've had a great session of learning. Thanks to both Vishram as well as Light and Divya, of course. So yeah, thanks everyone for attending the webinar.
Yeah, I would especially like to thank Laith and Vishram because they're both in the eastern part, one in Singapore, one in Australia, late in the night, still here talking to our clients. So thank you very much. I think your insights on bridging both the elements of technology and humans and aligning everything together was a great takeaway. And I think our clients got both sides of the spectrum. And hopefully we will get to talk to them further with specific use cases, discussions that they may have. Our email addresses are here. Please feel free to reach out to any of us if you want to, talk to us and, discuss your issues further. So thank you very much and truly appreciate you giving us your time. Late, Vishram, you want to add in something in the end, except for let me go, I want to sleep.
No, not at all. Actually, I want to go listen to the webinar. Now, I want to say thank you, Divya. Thank you, Mukund, for your wonderful and amazing organization, and Prem and the whole team, and of course, Vishram, whom I've known from before the webinar, and I believe has a great solution and business too. So thank you all.
Yeah, can the panelists stay back, please? Thank you.
Once again, guys, thank you. Thank you, Divya, for organizing this. Thank you, Mukund, for your support in this one, right? And thank you, audience, right, for actually, asking these engaging questions, right? At least we know that you're not sleeping then, right? And once again, thanks, Late, for sharing your view on training and awareness programs. Really looking forward to working with you guys. Yeah, thank you.